Hello and welcome to this very special conversation. We are going to talk about digital India. We're going to talk about India going cashless. If you recall, it's been almost 2 years since the government declared its so-called war on cash when demonetization happened. Simultaneously, the Digital India initiative was launched. Aadhaar in the meantime, which is our biometric database here in India, has been growing and growing very fast. So what does this all mean for people who use a credit or a debit card? Is plastic going out? Is digital coming in? Is it secure? What is the new technological changes that are happening the world over? Joining me, two very special guests, Bob Reany, who's the Executive Vice President at Mastercard. Thank you, Bob. You do a lot of work in this area and we'd love to hear what you're doing. And Sudipta Roy of ICICI Bank. He's the General Manager in charge of the cards business. Thank you very much, Sudipta, for joining me as well. Bob, there was another expert comment which said that while increasingly, cashless means not using the plastic, but going digital with your card, but the fraud rates are also much higher in digital than they were in the plastic regime. How have you dealt with this aspect in other countries? So in India, I think the biggest concern we have is, while the bank does its bit, it freezes it. It's also now, I think, on the credit card gives you back if you've complained within a certain time.
Yes.
But I think somewhere from a customer's point, you feel, I've not seen that guy being punished. And I think that's more a security enforcement issue. But how did developed countries overcome this challenge where probably, the rates of fraud are far lower than out here?
Well, I would actually tell you that the rates of fraud for a digital transaction in India aren't that much higher than a card. So that's got a lot to do. So the statistic that you quoted actually is absolutely true. In markets that don't do authentication, they don't send an OTP, they don't get a fingerprint, they don't do anything, they just let the transaction go. Fraud is 3 times higher for a e-commerce type transaction than a regular going into the store transaction. So that's generally true on a global level. Because India has required authentication and they make the person validate who they are, that number is much, much closer in this market. So interestingly, what I'm doing in developed markets is trying to get authentication to occur more frequently. So the fingerprint, all the things we talked about, the layers of security, and using machine learning, which is a newer thing, where we take all these bits of data and we let the intelligence system start to identify where the fraud is instead of creating rules and having people do so much of the work to analyze these transactions. We're actually analyzing them with a lot more sophisticated system. So authentication, more data, and machine learning, those are 3 ways that we're really accelerating the decline of fraud in the card not present space. And again, the good news is we don't have to add a lot of problems for consumer. The consumer doesn't really have to do anything extra. So those are the real 3 tenets of what we're doing.
It's an interesting point Bob makes, because I think perception-wise here we still worry about the fact that, oh my God, the minute I go digital, I'm under attack. And, we are probably better off than other markets in the world. But perception, how do you fight that perception as a bank, as a leading bank?
See, I think, yes, there is a perception and there is an overhang that, using digital methods of payment is probably far more riskier than using cash, right? But, the solution to that is, couple of things. First is, foremost thing is more customer education as to what to do the right things, right? For example,
do you believe that there's scope for more customer education?
Yes, we do believe that. Yes,
specifically
we do believe that there is more scope for customer education, both by the banks as well as by the Indian Banks Association, which we have been doing a couple of rounds, as well as by Reserve Bank of India, as you know, and you have been seeing Reserve Bank of India has been quite active over the last couple of months in terms of doing. But simple things like you do not give out your password to anybody. No bank ever calls, right? People fall. Most of the fraud incidents that is happening in India is actually very low tech, right? It is human, right? It is human weakness that is actually compromising things, not technological weakness. People calling and asking you, please give me a one-time password, please give me your card number, please give me your CVV number, expiry date. Now, people, and we see an astonishing number of people who are actually very well educated giving those
falling for it,
falling for it, right? So I think the solution, one solution is technological, customer education. There's the first frontier of attacking sort of fraud. The next frontier is that, even if somebody gives out, right, how do you figure out whether that's a genuine transaction or not? And that is why the iceberg below, which is either tokenization or device fingerprinting, or as Bob said, geolocation-based solutions. Biometric is a good solution, but biometric is more for point of sale, face-to-face transaction. Biometric for e-commerce is probably a little away now. And so, if your first round of defense, which is customer education, fails, then how do you back it up with technology as your second round of defense? And I do believe that banks in India actually have adopted global practices. And I would think the practices that we follow are probably at par with any global bank. In fact, the practice of putting the control in your hands, deactivating, activating your cards, deactivating your type of transactions. You can turn off your online transactions on ICICI Bank iMobile app right now on your card, right? So you come back from overseas, you turn off the international transactions. So three things: education, technology, and giving customer control in hands of the customer will make it far, far more safer. It is a journey. It will not happen overnight, but it remains a journey. But I do believe that with efforts of Reserve Bank of India and the banks, I think we have been able to get across to customers a decent amount of message that using digital is safe, and that is why we see the uptick of digital transactions. And besides, now the comfort that they get from the Reserve Bank of India guideline, saying that if you have not done the transaction and if you dispute it within 7 days, then you are not liable for it. I think that goes a long way in assuring the customer that even if something goes wrong, I'm not liable for it.
It's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you very much for joining me here on this very interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you very much.